Hume on Monkish Virtues by William Davie. In the second inquiry, Hume denounces the monkish virtues, saying that men of sense will regard them as vices because they cross all desirable ends, stupefy the understanding and harden the heart, obscure the fancy, and sour the temper. He includes under this heading celibacy, fasting, penance, mortification, self-denial, humility, silence, solitude. No doubt Hume's stance regarding the monkish virtues does fit into a particular vision of desirable life, but it may be questioned whether it fits his philosophy with full consistency. In this paper I will argue that Hume's explicit formula for identifying virtues fails to justify his rejection of the monkish virtues if it is followed without prejudice. Section 1. Identifying virtues. Our whole comprehension of virtue and our competence to identify it in any community ultimately derives from our perception of virtue in particular instances. The edifice of morality reaches into the thin air of abstractions and general rules, but it does not begin there, and it is always grounded in the concrete experience of human individuals. In the most basic case, what we perceive is not, say, the trait of kindness, as embodied in George. We rather perceive the whole phenomenon of George in his particular situation. We pick up information about the person and the surroundings, including bits about motivation, moods, temptations, complications of all sorts, plus the general background understanding we have of human nature. We ascertain whether the man's character is useful or agreeable for himself or others. All this is needed to pave the way for the activation of moral sentiment. Then we get an impression, not an idea, of the man's virtue. We feel the warm glow of George's kindness on this particular occasion. How does language figure into our experience of moral differences? We know that as any individual's time on earth mounts up, and as one gains a few years of experience, he or she will gradually acquire abstract ideas and the words which signify them. Here in brief is Hume's account of the formation process. The first order of business is to notice a resemblance among certain objects of experience. We apply the same word to all of them. Thus, we would gather indefinitely many instances in which the word kind is applied to something or where somebody speaks of kindness. The word becomes associated with a certain custom or habit of mind, which custom is evoked whenever we hear or speak that word, or at least whenever the word is used wrongly. In that event, the custom fires up some relevant counter-examples for our attention. If somebody asserts, "True kindness is always well planned and fully reflective," our mind instantly lights up cases of spontaneous or impulsive kindness. If we should overhear, she is a very kind person, so people don't like her," we know that something is amiss. Our competence in handling abstract ideas clearly underwrites the catalogue that Hume confidently envisions at the start of his second inquiry. We can make two lists, one for virtues and one for vices. In this process, Hume thinks the very nature of language guides us almost infallibly. We can easily appreciate why this should be so. Our moral epithets are mounted on items of direct perception. Our understanding of a particular word is really a custom of associating certain elements of our own experience. He offers some concrete guides, each of which can be used from one's armchair. Number 1. A philosopher can enter into his own breast for a moment and consider whether or not he should desire to have this or that quality ascribed to him. Number 2. He can consider whether the attribution of a particular quality to him would come from a friend or from an enemy. Number 3. He can consider whether a quality, if ascribed to any person, implies either praise or blame, and whether it may enter into any panegyric or satire of his character and manners. We can do these things from our armchair, but notice how firmly we are placed in the social world even here. We enter our own breast, but what we listen for is the verdict of others. Whether used separately or in conjunction, these guides will show us pretty reliably where to put any given word in the catalogue. Reliably is important. Hume's presumption is clearly that any sensible person, any speaker of our shared language who undertakes the cataloging of virtue and vice will get the same result as any other. Indeed, that is the philosophical point of the catalogue. It is a graphic display of the profound commonality that grounds our moral lives. The common element is not merely a verbal one. Our words reflect a deeper reality, a fabric of shared reactions and feelings. The catalogue of virtue and vice is a reflection of that fabric, and as such it constitutes a convincing rejoinder to the would-be moral skeptic, who thinks moral distinctions do not mark anything real. The catalogue is evidence that they do. Moreover, no human being can fail to perceive the kind of differences marked by the moral vocabulary. No wonder Hume dismisses the moral skeptic as disingenuous and superficial. Hume asserts that a philosopher can never be considerably mistaken in constructing the catalogue of virtue and vice. Of course, we can be mistaken in our moral judgments about particular cases. We can fail to say what we mean using the wrong word for a specific feeling reaction, or we can have a wrong, for example, inappropriate or hasty feeling reaction, in which case we will speak in a manner that betrays our haste or biased judgment. Either way, the mistake is pretty easily corrected, in principle at least, by somebody who reminds us of the right word or who points out facts that would change our reaction, our perception, if we took them into account. We are, in a manner of speaking, forced by our shared language to view things from a reasonably objective standpoint. Typically, then, we regard only the person in question and his narrow circle. In judging of characters, the only interest or pleasure which appears the same in every spectator is that of the person himself whose character is examined, or that of persons who have a connection with him. What is it like to be this man, or to be his friend, or his child? If we attend to the fact, Hume thinks our felt reaction should be in alignment from one person to the next. Of course, we are fallible creatures, and the alignment may be imperfect. We should never be too surprised if a personal element remains evident, even in our most serious and well-considered moral judgments. Hume seems to be thinking that we are on much safer ground and much less likely to make a mistake when it comes to moral abstractions reflected in two lists of the catalogue. In part, this confidence reflects the strictly limited nature of the task. All we are to do is to tally up two sets of words, one set of words which are taken in good sense and another in the opposite. These words are directly associated with patterns of feeling reaction, which at bottom may be classified as kinds of pleasure or pain. The difference between pleasure and pain, between the two kinds of response we experience, is so wide, at least in clear instances, that we cannot imagine any serious possibility of error. Everybody knows that kind is taken in a good sense, cruel the opposite. Now let us return to the start of the inquiry, where we are introduced to the idea of a catalogue of virtue and vice. What happens if I try Hume's procedure on the so-called monkish virtues? As a preliminary to our fuller consideration, I will do what Hume describes. I enter into my own breast for a moment and consider whether I want other people to impute various qualities to me. Fasting, yes, as it happens, I would not mind that one, as I have burdened my frame with extra weight. Self-denial, certainly, I am much more afraid of being regarded as self-indulgent. Silent, solitary, yes, these fit my heroic self-image. Try the difficult ones. Celibacy, that would be unwelcome since I am a happily married man. Mortification, it sounds unpleasant, so I do balk at having this assigned to me. Plainly, I do not get the result Hume prompts us to expect. Given my reaction, some of these qualities would have to be counted as acceptable, even virtuous. Section 2. Defending monkish virtues and persons. It seems not too difficult to defend the monkish virtues on Hume's own terms if we take them up one at a time. Such a procedure should be a legitimate starting place, since the qualities termed monkish are separable one from the next. A person could be celibate without being silent, humble without fasting, and so forth. For illustration, let us consider solitude, which we may understand to mean simply being alone. If magnified to its logical extreme, solitude would produce a hermit, one who shuns all manner of social contact, lives alone, eats alone, and converses not at all, unless with animals or trees. We can understand why Hume might resist such a removed form of life, for on his showing it would be like opting out of morality and other human ways of being. Humans are designed to be gregarious and sociable. It is our deep nature, as is evidenced by the ubiquitous power of sympathy, by our capacity for justice, and by the evident pleasure we take in company. It would not be entirely fair, though, to rest our attention on such an extreme case. Solitude, like so many other things, is susceptible of degrees, and we should remember that, as Hume says in one place, no quality is absolutely either blamable or praiseworthy. It is all according to degree. A due medium, says the Peripatetics, is the characteristic of virtue. But this medium is chiefly determined by utility. To fairly consider the merit of solitude, we must look toward examples where it is practiced in some reasonable and moderate way. There may come upon any person times when he or she needs to be alone. Sometimes it is for the sake of performing a fundamental reassessment of one's life, or for seeking a change in attitude, or even for trying to change some seemingly trivial habit. Anybody who wants to quit smoking cigarettes would do well to remove himself for a time from the familiar social environment with its host of cues to smoke, the worst of which are probably other smokers. Many people find that solitude promotes insight as well as affording an opportunity for change. This has ever been so. It is not just a fact about our noisy, bustling culture. Several of the world's great religious leaders have spent a stretch of time alone before returning to the world to preach what they have discovered or invented. Hume might wish that they had stayed in society and missed their insights. Similarly, many of our great thinkers have embraced solitude for the sake of their ideas. Newton remained predominantly a recluse for extended times, with little social contact and no close relationships. His focus was exclusively on his work. The same may be said of young David Hume in the spring of 1729 as he began to work out the ideas for his philosophy. True, Hume seems to have overdone it, overheating his brain and falling into the disease of the learned. But there is no doubt that his solitary labors were amply rewarded. He was ready to write the treatise, the main part of which was composed in France, at La Fleche, a small quiet country town with a large library and few distractions. What happens if we consider a monkish person, one who reveres and adheres to the whole train of monkish virtues, who has chosen a permanent monkish stance in life? Such a one is Ignatius of Loyola, who became the founder of the Jesuits. Ignatius is interesting because it seems that he was in full possession as a young man of all the things Hume regards as desirable. He was from a wealthy family, and he is described as a lively and trim young man, very fond of the court dress and good living. At about age 30, he was badly injured in battle. A cannonball struck his legs. To pass the time while recuperating from his injury, he read the only available books, which were stories of the lives of saints. Over time, he found the prospect of their kind of life, a monkish existence, so to speak, more and more agreeable to him, and in the end he decided to devote the rest of his life to that way of being. We know from his great popularity that Ignatius must have been pretty agreeable and or useful to others, certainly to others of a similar lifestyle. But this is all that can be required for virtue, namely, the man finds his life agreeable and his narrow circle responds to him favorably. Are monks useful to themselves or to the larger society of which they are part? Well, the Jesuits built and maintained the library that Hume used at La Fleche. That was surely useful. In our own day, the monks of New Skeet have developed and promulgated a gentle, effective program of dog training. For many years, the Christian Brothers operated a fine winery in California. These are meaningful contributions to society. In summary, it appears that we should approve of some monks at least, and that some of these monkish qualities should be restored to the virtue column.